David glanced in the rearview mirror, his heart swelling with a familiar, profound love. Curled up in his booster seat, his 9-year-old son, Leo, was fast asleep. Leo's head was tilted at an awkward angle against the window, his mouth slightly agape, and a halo of streetlights passed over his fine, sandy-brown hair. He looked like an angel, exhausted from a triumphant day at the school's science fair. His project, a miniature volcano that had actually erupted with baking soda and vinegar, had won a blue ribbon. David smiled to himself, the memory of Leo's ecstatic shout still ringing in his ears. It was for moments like this that he worked so hard, juggling his freelance graphic design work with the all-consuming, beautiful chaos of single fatherhood. They were a team, he and Leo, an unbreakable unit. The suburbs of Northwood were quiet at this hour, the manicured lawns and stately brick houses bathed in the soft, orange glow of dusk. It was a world away from the city apartment where David had grown up, and he'd chosen it for that very reason. For the peace, for the illusion of safety. He slowed for a stop sign, the car rolling to a smooth halt. In the periphery he saw it, the sudden, jarring splash of red and blue lights, painting the interior of his sedan in frantic, alternating colors. His stomach tightened into a cold, hard knot. It was a feeling he knew too well, a primal dread that every black man in America carries in his bones. He checked his speed. He hadn't been speeding. His taillights were working. His registration was current. He knew, with a certainty that was both weary and terrifying, that none of that mattered. Through the mirror, he saw the officer approaching, his hand resting casually on his service weapon. David took a slow, deliberate breath, forcing his own hands onto the steering wheel at 10 and 2, making them visible. He had to remain calm, not for himself but for the sleeping boy in the back. The slightest panic from him could escalate everything. What happened next was a blur of practiced injustice. A sharp rap on the window. David lowered it, the cool night air rushing in, carrying with it the scent of cut grass and impending trouble. The officer, a man with a hard jaw and eyes that seemed to hold a permanent squint of suspicion, shone a blindingly bright flashlight into David's face, then swept it across the car's interior. The beam lingered on Leo. License and registration, the officer, whose name tag read Miller, said. His voice was flat, devoid of courtesy. "Of course, officer," David replied, his own voice steady, betraying none of the adrenaline surging through his veins. "They're in the glove compartment. May I reach for them slowly?" Officer Miller didn't answer, just watched with that unnerving stillness. David retrieved the documents, his movements measured and precise. He handed them over. The officer glanced at them, then his eyes flickered back to the rearview mirror, to Leo. A frown creased his forehead. "Whose kid is that?" he asked, the question loaded with accusation. "That's my son, Leo," David said, keeping his tone even. "He's exhausted. We're coming home from his school science fair." The officer's squint deepened. He looked from David's dark skin to the image of the sleeping child, whose skin was pale, his hair a light brown. The math, in the officer's prejudiced mind, didn't add up. "Step out of the car, sir." "Officer, is there a problem?" David asked, the first edge of protest creeping into his voice. "My son is asleep. I said, step out of the car. Now." The command was sharp, a clear threat. David complied. The moment he was out of the vehicle, the world tilted. The officer's posture became more aggressive. A second patrol car had pulled up silently, and another officer now stood by, observing. The quiet suburban street had become a stage. Neighbors' lights began to flick on behind drawn curtains. "We've had reports of a kidnapping in the area," Officer Miller stated, his eyes scanning David up and down, cataloging him not as a father, but as a potential criminal. "A man matching your description." The phrase was a punch to the gut. "Matching my description?" David thought, a bitter, hysterical laugh threatening to bubble up. He was a black man in a predominantly white neighborhood. That was the only description that mattered. He tried to reason with them, to explain. He offered to show them the blue ribbon in Leo's backpack, the photos on his phone of them at the fair just an hour ago. 1,000 tiny proofs of their life together. But Officer Miller was not listening. He was seeing what he wanted to see, a scenario that confirmed his biases. The commotion woke Leo. He sat up, rubbing his eyes, his small face a mask of confusion and fear. "Daddy? What's happening?" "It's okay, buddy. Just a misunderstanding," David said, trying to project a calm he did not feel. Seeing the boy awake and distressed seemed to solidify the officer's suspicions. They moved in, their actions swift and decisive. David felt the cold, metallic bite of handcuffs on his wrists. The click of the ratchet was the sound of a nightmare beginning. He was being arrested for driving his own son home. "No. Daddy!" Leo's cry was sharp, a shard of glass in the quiet night. "It's all right, Leo. I love you," David yelled as they pushed him toward the patrol car. His words swallowed by the slamming of a door. He was trapped, a spectator to his own life unraveling. He watched as a female officer from the second car gently coaxed a weeping Leo out of his car seat. The state was intervening. They were taking his son. The weekend in jail was a descent into a specific kind of hell. It was the cold that seeped into his bones, the constant, humming fluorescent lights that banished time, and the corrosive acid of helplessness. He was processed, photographed, and stripped of his identity, becoming just another inmate in an orange jumpsuit. His one phone call was to his sister, Sarah, her shocked gasp on the other end of the line echoing his own disbelief. She promised to get to the station immediately to find Leo to start making calls. But the system, once it has its claws in you, does not let go easily. By Monday morning, the situation had escalated beyond a wrongful arrest. The state, represented by a prosecutor named an ambitious, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Albright, had filed for an emergency custody hearing. The official report, written by Officer Miller, painted a damning, fictional picture. A non-compliant man, a distressed child who didn't resemble him, a vague description that had now, conveniently, become a concrete justification. David met his public defender, a weary but kind man named Mr. Chun, in a small airless room that smelled of stale coffee and desperation. Mr. Chun laid out the grim reality. "They're not just accusing you of kidnapping anymore, David," he explained, his eyes full of a tired sympathy. "The charge is serious, but what they're really doing is using it to question your fitness as a parent. The custody hearing is their primary goal now." David felt the floor drop out from under him. "My fitness? I'm his father. I've raised him his whole life. How can they do this?" "Because they can," Mr. Chun said softly. "The initial report from the arresting officer gives them probable cause to investigate. They see a black father and a light-skinned child, and they jump to the worst possible conclusion. It's ugly, it's prejudiced, but it's the legal hurdle we have to clear." The following days were a torturous crawl toward the trial date. David was out on bail thanks to Sarah pooling every resource she had, but he was not free. He was living in a nightmare. He wasn't allowed to see Leo. His son was in the temporary care of his sister, but the state loomed over them, a constant, threatening presence. Every phone call with Leo was heartbreaking. The boy's voice was small and scared, full of questions David couldn't answer without terrifying him further. "When are you coming home, Daddy?" "Soon, buddy. Promise. I'm just sorting out some grown-up stuff." The lie tasted like ash in his mouth. He felt like a failure, a protector who had failed to protect his child from the very real monsters of the world. He spent his nights staring at the ceiling, replaying the arrest over and over, his mind a carousel of fear and fury. His work sat untouched. His life was on hold, hanging by the thinnest of threads. Ms. Albright, the prosecutor, was a formidable opponent. In preliminary meetings, she was all sharp angles and sharper words. She saw the world in black and white, in files and statutes. To her, David was a variable in an equation of risk. The police report was a fact. The visual discrepancy between father and son was evidence. Her job, as she saw it, was to protect the child. She radiated a chilling certainty, a conviction that she was on the side of the angels, even as she was tearing a family apart based on a lie. The pressure mounted. Mr. Chun worked tirelessly, gathering evidence of David's character. Testimonials from teachers, neighbors, other parents. He built a fortress of paper to prove what should have been obvious: that David was a loving, dedicated father. But he knew it might not be enough to overcome the visceral, visual prejudice that had started it all. One evening, a week before the trial, Mr. Chun delivered the news David had been dreading. David, Ms. Albright is not backing down. She's going to put Officer Miller on the stand, and he's going to tell his version of the story. I think we need to consider putting Leo on the stand. David's blood ran cold.
No.
Absolutely not. He's 9 years old. I will not put him through that. I will not have that woman question him, twist his words, scare him in front of a room full of strangers. I understand, Mr. Chun said gently. Believe me, it's the last thing I want to do. But David, think about it. Her entire case is built on a false impression. It's built on what a stranger thought he saw. Leo is the only one who can tell them the truth. Not what he thinks, not what he assumes, but what he knows. What he lives every single day. The choice was agonizing. It felt like a betrayal, subjecting his son to the trauma of the courtroom to save him from the trauma of separation. He spent the night sleepless, pacing his empty apartment, the silence mocking him. He looked at Leo's drawings stuck to the fridge, at the scuffed-up baseball glove on the counter, at the whole universe they had built together. In the end, he knew Mr. Chun was right. The most powerful weapon they had against a lie was the simple, unshakable truth. And the keeper of that truth was his son. The day of the trial arrived gray and overcast, the sky a perfect mirror of David's soul. He put on the suit Sarah had bought for him, a charcoal gray armor that felt like a costume. It was too stiff, too formal for the man who usually wore jeans and lived for pancake Saturdays. In the courthouse hallway, he saw Officer Miller speaking with Ms. Albright. The officer looked confident, self-assured, a man utterly convinced of his own righteousness. The courtroom was an intimidating cathedral of wood paneling and stern-faced authority. The air was thick with a tense silence. David sat beside Mr. Chun, his hands clenched into fists in his lap. He felt the weight of a dozen pairs of eyes on him, the jury, the spectators, the court officials. He felt like a specimen under a microscope. The proceedings began. Ms. Albright was clinical and effective. She called Officer Miller to the stand. He recounted the events of that night, his voice steady and professional. He spoke of the high crime area, a lie, the erratic driving, another lie, and the visibly distressed child who did not appear to be related to the suspect. He presented a narrative so seamless, so believable, that for a terrifying moment, David himself almost doubted his own reality. Mr. Chen's cross-examination chipped away at the officer's story, highlighting the vagueness of the initial description and the lack of any real evidence. But the damage was done. The seed of doubt had been planted in the jury's mind. Then came the moment. The defense calls Leo Carter to the stand, Mr. Chun announced. A hush fell over the courtroom. All eyes turned to the back as a bailiff led Leo, Indiana. He looked so small, so fragile, swallowed by the cavernous room. He was wearing his best shirt, the one with little rocket ships on it, and his hair was neatly combed. He walked with hesitant steps, his eyes wide with fear, searching the room until they found David's. David gave him a small, encouraging nod, though his own heart was breaking into a million pieces. Leo climbed into the witness stand, which was so large it seemed to swallow him whole. The judge, a woman named Evans with a stern but not unkind face, offered him a small, reassuring smile. "Don't be nervous, young man," she said gently. Ms. Albright approached the stand. She began her questioning softly, her voice deceptively sweet. "Hello, Leo. My name is Ms. Albright. I just have a few simple questions for you. Okay?" Leo nodded, his lip trembling. "Leo, do you remember the night the police officer stopped your car?" "Yes," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Were you scared that night, Leo?" "Yes." "What were you scared of?" she pressed. Leo looked down at his hands. "The lights. And the yelling." Ms. Albright paused for effect, letting the words hang in the air. The yelling. I see. She took a step closer. Her questions were a carefully laid trap, designed to corner a child. She was trying to paint a picture of a fearful boy in the presence of a dangerous man. David could feel his blood boiling, a helpless rage churning within him. He wanted to scream, to leap over the table and shield his son. Finally, Ms. Albright moved in for what she believed would be the final blow. She turned, gesturing vaguely in David's direction without looking at him, as if he were an object. Leo, she said, her voice ringing with confidence. I have one last, very important question for you. Can you please look around the room and point to the man who was driving the car that night? This was it. The moment her entire case was built on. She expected hesitation, confusion, fear. She expected the jury to see a scared child pointing at a man who looked nothing like him. The entire courtroom held its breath. The silence was absolute, so profound you could hear the faint buzz of the overhead lights. Leo looked up. His eyes, full of tears, scanned past the jury, past the prosecutor, past everyone, until they locked with David's. The fear in his gaze was replaced by something else, something fierce and pure. He lifted a small, trembling hand. He pointed directly at David. The tears finally spilled over, rolling down his cheeks as he spoke, his child's voice clear and ringing with an unshakable conviction that filled every corner of the silent room. That's my best friend, Dad. The 5 words landed with the force of a physical blow. They were not the words of a victim. They were not the words of a scared, kidnapped child. They were a declaration of love so pure, so absolute, that they shattered the entire false narrative of the prosecution. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. Ms. Albright froze, her mouth slightly open, the confident smirk wiped clean from her face. She was utterly stunned. Mr. Chun let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, a slow smile spreading across his face. David felt the tears he'd been holding back for weeks finally break free. He wasn't crying from sadness or fear, but from an overwhelming wave of love and pride. His son, his small, brave boy, had faced down the monster and slayed it with the simple truth. Even Judge Evans seemed moved. Her stern judicial mask cracked, and her eyes glistened. She looked over at the bailiff, a burly man who had seen everything, and saw him turn his head away, discreetly wiping at his eye with the back of his hand. The spell was broken. Ms. Albright, flustered, tried to recover. Objection, Your Honor. The witness is not. Objection overruled. Judge Evans cut her off, her voice sharp as steel. She turned her attention back to the witness stand, her expression now softened with a profound gentleness. Leo, she said, her voice much kinder now, can you tell me what a best friend does? And Leo, finding his voice, began to talk. He talked about how his dad made the best pancakes in the world, shaped like dinosaurs. He talked about how they had a secret handshake. He talked about how his dad taught him to ride a bike and held on until he was sure Leo wouldn't fall. He talked about how, when he had nightmares, his dad would sit with him until he fell back asleep, no matter how late it was. He wasn't giving testimony. He was painting a portrait of fatherhood. He was describing a life, a home, a bond built on a million small moments of love and care. With every word, he dismantled the prosecution's case, brick by imaginary brick, until nothing was left but the ugly prejudice it was built on. When he finished, there was another profound silence. Judge Evans looked from the radiant, tearful face of the boy on the stand to the crumbling composure of the prosecutor, and then to David, whose own face was a portrait of vindicated love. Ms. Albright, the judge said, her voice low and dangerous, do you have any further questions for this witness? Ms. Albright, pale and shaken, could only stammer, No, Your Honor. Good, Judge Evans said. She looked at the jury, then at the court. Then this is over. Case dismissed with prejudice. The custody petition is denied in its entirety. She slammed her gavel down, the sound echoing like a thunderclap of justice. But she wasn't finished. She fixed her gaze on Ms. Albright and, by extension, the entire system that had brought this family to her courtroom. Let the record show, she began, her voice ringing with controlled fury, that this court finds the actions of the arresting officers and the prosecutor's office to be a shocking and appalling abuse of power, predicated on flimsy evidence and blatant racial bias. A family is not defined by melanin. A father's love is not determined by a stranger's prejudice. This case should never have been brought. This family should never have been broken apart. You would do well to remember that. It was over. The words David had longed to hear had finally been spoken. Mr. Chun clapped him on the back as the bailiff helped Leo down from the stand. The boy ran, a blur of rocket ships and relief, straight into David's open arms. David buried his face in his son's hair, holding him so tightly, he thought they might merge into one person. "You were so brave," he whispered. "You were so brave." The aftermath was swift. The story, with its dramatic courtroom conclusion, was picked up by the local news. The image of the tough bailiff wiping away a tear became a symbol of the day's events. Officer Miller was placed on administrative leave pending a full internal affairs investigation. The police chief issued a public, formal apology to David and his son. More importantly, Judge Evans's scathing rebuke sent shockwaves through the local justice system. It prompted a mandatory review of bias training within the police department and the prosecutor's office. The case of David and Leo Carter became a cautionary tale, a benchmark for how quickly and disastrously prejudice could derail justice. Returning home was like waking from a long, terrible dream. The apartment was the same, but they were different. The ordeal had left a scar, a new awareness of the world's fragility and its capacity for casual cruelty. But it had also forged their bond into something even stronger than before. It was tempered, steel-tested by fire. That night, as David tucked Leo into bed, the boy looked up at him, his eyes serious. "Dad," he said, "are you my best friend, too?" David smoothed his son's hair back from his forehead, his heart full to bursting. "You're more than that, Leo," he said softly. "You're my hero." This story is a powerful reminder of a fundamental truth. A family is built not on appearances, but on love. It is a testament to the fact that prejudice, no matter how systemic or intimidating, can be shattered by the simple, profound power of truth. The world saw a mismatch, a problem to be solved, a suspicion to be investigated. A child saw his best friend. Sometimes the most eloquent arguments don't come from lawyers, and the most righteous judgments don't come from the bench. They come from the pure, honest heart of a child. It serves as a lesson to all of us, to look past our own biases, to question the narratives we are fed, and to listen for the truth, even when it comes in the smallest and most unexpected of voices. For in those voices, we can often find the greatest justice of all.